This conversation originally premiered at CFF on Tuesday, March 20th, 2024 to a live theater audience. It is a fine art to delve into emotional realities while infusing fictional elements to craft storylines. This great conversation with CFF filmmakers shares insights on discovering the optimal way to create resonant, innovative, and sensitive adaptations of these intricate subject matters. Cheers, Aisha Evelyna, Taylor Olson, and Christopher Yip. Welcome to the Fest.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. So excited. My name, as Jen said, is Aisha Evelyna, she, her. And I'd like to take a moment to have our other panelists introduce themselves. So, Taylor, if you will.
Hi, I'm Taylor Olson. I'm from Chipuktuk, Halifax. He, they.
Cool. And hi, I'm Christopher Yip from Edmonton, but now based in Toronto. He, him.
Awesome. So, yes, the clips we just saw are from Fish Boy, made by Christopher Yip. And Look at Me, made by Taylor Olson. So happy to get a chance to speak with you today. We should just dive into these questions. So why did each of you choose to make your specific film? Like, of all the stories in the world you could tell, why the one that you chose to dramatize that you both have here at the festival? Chris, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, Fish Boy is the first script I ever wrote while I was born and raised in a very Chinese, very Christian household. And gender and sexuality always weighed on me heavily, but I didn't really get a chance to explore until I left home. And leaving church, like, I grew up with the church and it was a family for me, but eventually I felt like I needed to leave in order to be myself. And it was a very difficult decision, but that really stayed with me. And when you start out trying to figure out your voice, trying to tell a story that only you could tell. Fish Boy, I kind of clung to it the many years that I had this stupid decision to enter the film industry. Yeah.
And we're so happy you stayed. Similarly to you, Taylor, like, obviously you're dealing with some really heavy stuff. So can you tell the audience why, like, of all the stories you could talk about, because you're from Halifax, you could talk about being from Halifax. So, like, there are so many things. Why specifically this story for you?
I forget who said this, but I've sort of clung to it ever since, is this idea that artists are usually just working out some shit, like, what's your shit? And for me, it seems to always come back to trying to work through some sort of shame. I hate shame. Like, I hate the feeling of it. I think we all do. And so this is something, I've dealt with an eating disorder since I was like 13 years old, that has just sort of hung over my shoulder. And it's one of those things where, like, the shadow of it is bigger if you don't talk about it. And I felt like I just kind of wish that the 13-year-old version of myself had seen something like this and been like, oh, I'm not the only one. It's not only like the stereotypical thing that we see in media of, like, maybe young women, like, and so that's partially why.
Also, the thought that just popped into my head, I have notes, but who needs notes when you're a person that kind of has the gift of the gab and forgot to put their phone on not lock? But the thought I have is, as a filmmaker, like, when you have your movie on the screen and then you're watching it with a full theater, there's an emotional cost, I guess, in some ways. And so I'm curious, or, like, for me personally, like, I shrink in the chair, or, like, I just go outside. And so I'm curious for each of you respectively what that process has been like. I know that you had work at Slam Dance before coming to Canadian Film Fest, and I know that your series Streams Flow from a River was that a Cannes series, which is a pretty big deal. And so, yeah, when it comes to putting ourselves on screen, obviously you're talking about Fish Boy, Chris, but, like, when it comes to putting ourselves on screen, our stories, can you share more about, like, the emotional nature of it, the cost, like, how you rev yourself up for it, like, what that process is like? Because it's very brave, so I'm curious.
Yeah. I want to hear from you too, of it, like,
Oh no,
you're also,
you won't.
No, it's like, because your work is also extremely personal and you put a lot of yourself into it too. And also, I mean, I don't have the guts to be in front of the camera.
I'm a narcissist.
Stop. But both of you can tell me about that. But you have to find something, a story that's so important for you to tell that, all the rejections and the, luckily in Canada we have Arts Council grants, but, like all the rejections and the film festivals that say no, and the people who you clumsily tell your log line to and they're like, what the, it's still, you're the first one in and you're the last one out, like it has to have so much meaning to you to tell it, and balancing that with also, as Taylor said, it's like I hope that I can tell this story, but also young people growing up the way I did can also see themselves in a way that I wish that I had. It's very difficult, I think, making something so personal, putting it out there, and letting it go, and getting reviews, and generally people are like, oh, the cinematography wasn't that good, or the acting was kind of wooden. And I was like, damn, that's like, it's very humbling. And I think even, for me too, I feel like I'm still growing as a director and a storyteller, and I hope that in my future works I can learn to take a more objective step back. Mm-hmm. But I'm also very glad that the first few things that I did were like stories that only I could tell. And you kind of have to put yourself on the line. It's tough. Yeah.
That's the bravery we talk about when they say like the bravery, like, it's kind of, in some ways I feel like it's kind of, the word eludes me now, but like kind of like, yeah, shut up. But like, because it's like there are people that like go and save kittens from trees and save people from houses that are on fire. And then like, in some ways it's like, is there a comparison when it comes to bravery? But I think what you just spoke about was exactly that. The willingness to put an authentic story on screen goes back to how brave you're willing to be. But I think, as you said, this bravery comes from like not being able to sleep until you get the thing on a screen, so it's a great point. I'll throw to you, Taylor. How do you deal with it? Because you're vulnerable.
It's not like you say, it comes with a bit of a cost. You kind of go into it knowing that. It's funny, like tonight we're screening the film, and I was like, I'm not going to watch it tonight, mm-hmm. because it kind of sucks to watch it. Like the making of it is a beautiful experience, and hopefully the watching of it for other people is cathartic, maybe educational in a way, depending on what you're doing. But yeah, you have to be okay with saying like, well, this is my shame from this movie. For me personally, it's this is my shame. Here it is, and here's like my really, really messy journey towards something resembling self-love. And I think the creation of what we do, telling stories, is an act of love. Like, it's like, hey, you're a person, I'm a person. This is my experience. It really confuses me. I don't really know how to make sense of it, and I've been working through this for a long time. Is that your experience too? Does that make sense to you? And the more specific we are in that, the more universal it becomes, maybe. And so the cost becomes this, like, I don't like to think of it art as therapy at all, but but healing, like communal healing, hopefully.
Oh, that's so good. And then one of the things that I'm picking up on both of you, the idea of like not wanting to kind of like showing folks that like they're not alone. And you just saying like, in a way, it's an extension of love. People do very crazy things for love, So is it possible we're just a bunch of lovers, And also, Chris, I will answer your question. For me personally, when I put a work on screen, the people that I'm writing in my things just don't leave me alone. I wake up at 2:00 in the morning to go get a glass of water and maybe take a tinkle, and like one of them is on the corner of my bed being like, so we got to talk about the midpoint. And it's kind of just like, it's almost like everywhere, it's like raccoons popping up over behind people's shoulders being like, hi, what's up? Like everywhere, like it until I can like kind of get it on paper and then know I'm making the thing, it just like does not leave me alone. And so it's in some ways a compulsion, I guess. So maybe it's less so a labor of love for me. But in some ways I think what both of you just said when it comes to sharing love and like being able to show others something that you would have hoped you could have seen for yourself once upon a time, I think that's an extension of love, which is why I guess we did it, or continue to do it. My next question goes on to your individual characters that you choose to focus on, because as we know, people are onions. They're multifaceted, they're layered, they're dense, they contain multitudes. So when it comes to each of your films respectively, what part of your lived experience did you choose to focus on and why? So for example, you talk about like this idea of shame and like having an eating disorder, but then I'm also it's not just about a person with an eating disorder. You know what I mean? And then also in Fish Boy, it's not just about a boy who's kind of struggling with like his understanding of love or their understanding of love. It's more than that. So I guess it can be very difficult to put something on screen. So I guess the question is, how did you distill like the central heartbeat, central relationship, central narrative? Like, how did you parse through to distill?
The inspirations for Fish Boy were, I like to pitch it as like a mashup between Barry Jenkins' Moonlight and David Cronenberg's The Fly. So it has like a queer coming of age, then also the body horror, like the representing guilt and shame around sexuality, and also feeling like there's a monster inside of you trying to get out. And I think that, I wrote it at first as kind of like a more genre piece, and then over the pandemic, because we're far apart from our families, but also because I think in particular the Asian community, it was a time where we felt very isolated and far apart from each other. And I really wanted the story shifted to be more like a warm hug for young Asian kids growing up the way that I did, to feel safe and seen. Yeah, and I think that why that point in that kid's journey, I think, like growing up, there are scenes in the church, and it's all kind of like, I'll say this. I think like when people ask me, are you still religious? I say, after so many years of having God's voice in my head, I'm just happy for the quiet. Oh. And I think that in the character in the film, it is very much like every decision, every just like hint of desire or longing or affection that he feels for someone, is this okay, or what would God think of this? And I think, wrapping it in like a 16-year-old kid who's like working through emotions and hormones and that sort of thing made the most sense. Yeah. Oh,
that's good. Thank you. Yeah, I love that. Because then you talk about, it's so interesting because at first face value, in some ways, the read of this film is, okay, it's about a boy trying to figure out like his queer situation. But going and tapping into the religious thread, like really highlights something that I feel like is way deeper than, you know what I mean? So I appreciate that. Yeah, I love that. Being thankful for the quiet. Ooh.
Yeah, honestly, there's this is kind of, because it's like the first film that I made, now that I'm more experienced, I see kind of like narratively there's a lot going on, and I feel like as I get more experienced and more mature as a director, I'll be able to balance the different elements better in future projects and touch more on the kind of like religious part of it. And that's why I'm working on a feature film about cults. So yeah, if you are, it's in my bio, but if you are a loved one has accidentally stumbled into a cult, please let me take you out for coffee and we can have a chat. Yeah.
And Taylor, for you, how did you distill? Because you speak about shame, because again, at face value, this is about a person with an eating disorder, but again, it's more than that. So can you speak about your process of distilling and the writing process, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started as a solo play that I kind of did almost on a dare. My partner, who's a filmmaker whose film Bystanders played here last year. I was like, I was sort of maybe lamenting about like the idea that I wish I had seen something about this when I was a teenager, when I was dealing with this. And she was like, well, then you should probably do it. Like all of a sudden there's this idea that I had the responsibility to do it, to be like, and I was like, oh, great. So I applied for a grant and got the grant to do this solo play and put it off and wrote it the week before I performed it because I was like, I don't want to do this. So then I was almost like forced to by deadline, right? It was this kind of great thing where I don't think I would have done it. I would have been like, well, I'll just do this thing that's easier, that doesn't hurt so much, that, and I'm glad I did because every part of it was healing in some way. But in terms of distilling it down, when it came down to doing the film, I realized that like from solo play to film is a huge leap in terms of like structure and everything, of course, right? And I'd seen this movie called I'm a Sex Addict by Kazet Zahedi. I think that's how you pronounce their name, and he plays himself. He's a sex addict. It was deeply uncomfortable, incredibly vulnerable. I thought there's no way that this is what he's like in real life, but here it is. And I thought, well, maybe that's the way to do it, is if the point is to try to strip everything bare, let's tell a fictional autobiography where I make shit up, but the emotional truths are all real. Mm-hmm. And even the depiction of myself is fictional. It's a fictional version of myself, but it's how I feel. It's not how I am in real life, but so that was kind of the choice. It was like, all right, well, what are the emotional truths? And I'll try to hit those. It's the reason why the character's bisexual. I'm bisexual. And in the early drafts of this script, it would be like, can they just be one or the other? Can they just be straight or gay? It's just a little bit easier. And so, that was like in the first 16 pages when I shared with someone. And I thought, okay, well, actually, no. And I'm going to take that idea of they don't have to be one thing or the other and just layer that throughout the rest of the film as well.
And then you get nuance. I love that. Thank you for that. When you talk about, because you talk about the transition from... Also, hold on. Can we get into this whole writing a play before you have to perform it in a week? You thought I would miss that. I did not. Do tell.
I was just forced to.
By whom?
Well, I guess by myself. I got this grant, and part of the grant was I was going to do the production during these dates, and got it. So I booked the theater, and I was doing a different play in northern Nova Scotia. And yeah, I couldn't, like every time I looked at a page, I'd be like, this is awful. I wonder if I can give it back, but I've like spent this much money on booking the theater. So I've already paid it down. So I'm going to like lose that money and I'm poor. So at that point, then it was like, well, you have to do it. So I just, during the day before the shows would just write, and it was a total mess because I wrote it so fast and then had to just kind of do it. And so I built into the show that you would like be able to call for line because it's just talking to the audience. She's like, where am I? What am I talking about again? And that helped me get through it, really, yeah.
I want to watch that movie. Here's my pitch. Man receives grant for a movie or for a play, does not want to do play, but must do play so that he can pay rent. Honestly, the stakes are there, and they're like 10 out of 10. I just wanted to... Also, any of you wanting to make a film out there, if you haven't, just dare yourself to do it. Take a page out of Taylor's book. I wanted to transition to more so like the technical, like the filmmaking side of it. So for each of you respectively, like I wanted to talk about aspect ratio. Because that was a big facet. Like my next question was kind of like, it is very difficult to depict an entire person's life on screen. How did you maintain an element of truth and authenticity in your story without reenacting every single detail of your lived memories? For example, Chris in Fishboy, a part of me feels like you didn't almost drown in a swimming pool and then come up in another a lake to have people trying to baptize you. I feel like that did not happen. If it did, do tell, because we're sharing stories here. But a part of me, like, because that didn't happen, obviously you made specific choices to dramatize. And so I kind of just wanted to speak in that realm when it comes to the actual brass tacks of the filmmaking and the brass tacks of the writing. So to throw to you, Taylor, can you speak about your use of aspect ratio and how that kind of lent itself to the narrative? Because I thought that was a really interesting choice.
Thank you.
Also, before you go, to fill anyone in, because y'all probably haven't seen the movie yet, because it screens tonight, it starts in a wider aspect ratio. I think it's like, 1:6:6?
Yeah.
And then it kind of gets to like a 1:1, kind of like, so it closes in. So just wanted to learn more about that.
Yeah, so it's really the goal was to match a feeling of claustrophobia or sort of like being boxed in by the disorder. And so, at first the aspect ratio starts really, really tight, and then he relapses, and that actually gives him some freedom and some space. And it's this weird thing that, like, I think with a lot of people, whether an eating disorder, having an eating disorder is a lot like being an addict in some ways, in my experience. And so as soon as he relapses, the aspect ratio opens up because things are less claustrophobic, and that continues to happen as, ironically enough, he sees the positive effects of the eating disorder, meaning like losing weight. People treat you differently. People are more interested in you in different ways. That's positive at first until it starts to affect your health. Then that's negative again, and then the walls start to close in and aspect ratio shrinks again. And so it's sort of tied to claustrophobia, like psychological claustrophobia.
And forgive me if was it a gradual thing? Like you kind of just, or was it, because obviously I'm watching the movie, I'm engrossed. So like, was it gradual, or were there like specific scenes where you're like, okay, and this is the scene where we're going to kind of be in one by one?
Oh, no, it would be all of a sudden, but you would just see it transition on screen. So as we're transitioning between a scene to another, then there would be a moment that would sort of help trigger the release, and then it would change. And so it would be sort of like alongside those beats instead of gradual.
I thought that was a really bold choice, because a lot of times when filmmakers do that, it's like kind of rare. Like you'll see it in like, oh God, what's the name of that movie with the Batman? The one that happened, it was really dark and Robert Pattinson was in it.
Oh, the Batman.
You can tell I love superhero movies. Like a part of me feels like in that regard, they were different like aspect ratios, but like you kind of really couldn't tell. But then sometimes other filmmakers, like there's this movie Waves where they changed the aspect ratio right in smack dab in the middle. So can you speak about, like, did you have pushback when you made that choice? Were people like, that's crazy? Or like, were they kind of just like, do you? Like, what was the vibe on that?
You know what? It's a funny question, because I didn't have anyone to push back. Like
I love that for you.
Because we made the movie on like Canada Council money, so so the total budget was like $90,000 for the movie. So yeah, it was kind of like, and with Canada Council going in when I applied, it was like, oh, I'll just do it and then I'll add a producer later. And then Canada Council was like, no, you're not allowed to have a producer now. And I was like, oh God. So then I had to produce it, which was a terrible experience. I don't want to ever do that again. And so, yeah, there was no one there were like people that I would ask their opinions, friends, but they generally just seem to think I'm a little bit like crazy. So like, oh, just do whatever you want anyways. Like, what does it matter? Yeah. So yeah, there's no pushback really. Yeah. Okay. The DP would be like, where are we? Like usually it'd be like which aspect ratio. So he would screw it up mostly. Because he had to keep track of the 5 different aspect ratios as well.
There are 5?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I didn't notice that. Oh, wow. Also, for any of you out there, for Canada Council grants, if you don't want anyone to tell you no, you just have to produce the movie yourself. And like for Canada Council grants, you have to own the IP or the rights. So like, meaning the producer kind of can't hold on to them. However, producers are great people and you should have them. So
they're awesome.
Leaving that out to you. But to segue to Chris and Fishboy, so if you remember you obviously remember, I just said it, the visual metaphor of the drowning and then coming up. You spoke earlier about like this, I don't want to say Catholic guilt because that's not the vibe, but like God stuff.
Just regular Protestant guilt.
Okay, got it. Regular Protestant guilt. Can you speak about like your writing process and like how you came to find some of the visuals, and like just speak about the filmmaking and like the writing process and how it informed what we saw on screen.
Yeah, I think this was always supposed to be a very coming of age in the mind of the character's story. So there's a scene when he gets to a breaking point about his feelings for girls and boys. He kind of goes underwater and comes out into a beach. Like he jumps into a swimming pool and comes out into a beach. And after that, scales start to come out of his skin. And I mean, not to be on the nose, but they signify like the kind of like what is happening to me. I don't really understand. And then afterwards, his church comes around him and they kind of baptize him. But with the music and with the soundscape, it's less kind of hallowed and more like drowning him, kind of like keeping him under so he can't be himself. And I think, all this to say, it's complicated. Like it just deeply reflected the characters and by extension, definitely my feelings about the church, because so much of what I grew up with was, I loved my church family. I grew up with like watching elderly sitting by smiling toothless grins by the tea dispensers and little kids running through our legs. And you'd see them getting older and stuff too. And, you know, born and raised, like me and my brothers, my 2 younger brothers, all of our initials are CS because my parents named us after C.S. Lewis, who wrote Mere Christianity and Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I was literally born to my religious angst. But I think all that to say the kind of like magical realism, a lot of the film takes place in Patrick's head, dream stuff. At the end, when he finally feels free enough to embrace the love that he wants to explore, and I think that in the writing of it, it was just how can I get into the mind of a younger me and put that on screen and in a kind of like fantastic way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things I forgot about that sequence, because it's very visual stunning, but I forgot about the fish scales. I've seen it multiple times by this point. Can you speak about the significance of, like, because I think one of his parents calls him Fish Boy. Like, can you speak about the significance? Because I thought, like, there were many animals for this boy to turn into. So why fish scales? Why Fish Boy? Can you speak about that in relation to the character's arc and journey?
Mm-hmm, yeah. Well, definitely, I think, like, water imagery, feeling like you can, you know, the sensation of water on your skin and queerness and not feeling inside of your body. That was something that the character is like a swimmer and loves to spend a lot of time in the pool, and that's kind of like one of the few places where he feels like he can be himself. But then there's a scene later on when he comes home, and this film is 11 minutes. There's a shit ton of stuff going on. But like there's a scene where he comes home and he lies to his parents about, I was at swim practice. That's why I was late. And his dad calls him something in Cantonese because just telling him like you can't be out late, and just kind of scolds him, and he gives him a nickname, and it's Yu Zai, which is Fish Boy. So that's kind of like, to me, it illustrated there's like a gap of understanding between immigrant kids and their parents, especially when it comes to queerness and sexuality. But that gap, you know, it's really hard to bridge, and it kind of always exists. And oftentimes it's just a lot of people don't come out to their parents. A lot of people just like sit with that discomfort for the sake of keeping peace. And that's also the like language barrier and culture barrier that feeds into that. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good. Sorry, I was like, I lost my train of thought because I was paying attention to you. I love that. I have to send you my next draft of a thing.
No, don't.
That's brilliant. I guess my next question, and like a part of me feels like we have to wrap up soonish. I'll make this so quick because it kind of segues into like an audience kind of engagement. So if you have any questions, feel free to start letting them percolate, because I would love to hear your questions and we can ask these lovely filmmakers. Get them while you can, folks. They might not be available in 5 years. When we think about depicting these truthful stories on screen, there is a world where it could dance into trauma porn narratives. And I guess my question is, how did each of you respectively find the balance when it comes to both parts, levity but also kind of like the hard parts, and like also in some ways like authentically reflecting the communities that you're depicting on screen? So how did you, I guess, stay truthful to the communities you're depicting, and also not sensationalizing these traumas? So curious about how you navigated that, and maybe were like, if you ever had a draft where like, oh man, this is too sad, or is this too far? Like, I'm just curious about how you kind of worked around that delicate little dance.
Such a good question. I think early on I realized that like it'd be hard not to be with the story, and so a mentor of mine, I asked like, what do I do about that? And he was like, well, all you do is what you set out to do. Just try to like tell the emotional truths, and you have to like forget about the rest. Actually, like just search for something that feels truthful in some way to you, and then forgive the rest. And in that, I guess if you're doing that, and you might not lean into the drama of it, but because you're just trying to be like, does this feel like something I believe emotionally, at least, even if like fictionally you're like, like, because I struggled with like adapting it, and I struggled with like being like, well, this thing connected that thing with this, and at some point I was like, I think I just have to like be like, this feels true here, and this feels true here, and this feels true here, and just like let the mosaic be and just let it be, sort of thing. If that makes sense.
No, it does. It's have you ever heard the idiom gilding the lily? Like you don't have to, like, you know, when you're watching something and then it's like it's already inherently sad, and then like the strings come in and you're like, whoa, we don't need to do that. Like it sounds like kind of that was your approach, which is letting the thing be, and if it's truthful, it'll resonate. Chris, how did you navigate? Because your story is quite uplifting,
Mm-hmm.
and it could have taken the route of like being really sad. Even though it is inherently sad, I still felt lifted by the end. So was that important to you? Like, how did you navigate like kind of both edges of trauma versus happiness?
It's something I'm still trying to figure out. I think when you're talking about community-specific issues, you have that burden of representation, and I think it's difficult to speak for others, but also tell a story, and learning that at the same time it's a lot. I mean, looking back at Fishboy, you know, already there are things that I would do differently. You know, the film, it became more positive, and it became more, you know, uplifting, and less like the sad European and Asian cinema that I like, because I felt like it was what the community needed at the time. But I do think I'm very hopeful that, like, you know, in particular for Asian diasporic films, so much of it in the past 3 years, we've seen a boom, and we've seen kind of like diversity, and it's kind of like a hot commodity, and now it's on its decline slightly. But with that, initially it was kind of like, we can only tell stories that are aspirational. It's similar to kids' TV. It's like characters who are so perfect, and if they're queer or racialized, they have to be like, you know, they can't have any faults. And sometimes it can make the film a little boring or like one-dimensional. But in an Asian context, you know, seeing everything everywhere, seeing Beef, where we have like very complex, weird, fucked up, but also compelling characters who are also Asian, I'm very hopeful for where we go from here. And I think part of that is also having the freedom to explore genre, like horror and sci-fi, and break away. Not for me, I want to believe there's enough seats at the table for everyone. As long as one person is affected by like a diasporic immigrant story, I think we should still be able to tell them, because it means so much. It's new for someone all the time, but I also want space for us to, like, you know, move into being able to, like, I want to go to space. I want to do Star Wars. Like, I'd love to, you know, I grew up writing Star Wars fan fiction, so I would love to have that opportunity to, you know.
Yeah, here. I love that. Like, the otherness doesn't always have to be central to the narrative. Yeah. Oh, so good. Both of you. Do we have any questions from the audience? That's a great question. Artists are people too. How did you protect yourselves because you're dealing with some heavy stuff, so how did you protect yourself so you could be a functional human being in the world?
That's a good question. I think for me, coming onto set as a director, I really like to be, like, as much as possible, fun dad. So make sure everyone, like, feels they're having a good time, and it's a huge privilege. Like, I think coming from Edmonton and so far from the industry, I'll never forget how much, you know, how lucky I am to be on set, and all these people at different departments, talented folks, are there to support my vision. That's crazy. Like, sometimes it's just like, whoa, it's very humbling. But in that way, it's like, I learned a lot from actually, you know, volunteering at BIPOC TV and film during the pandemic, where I learned a different type of leadership that I hadn't observed on set before, which was from predominantly women of color who are just like, you know, we don't have to do the whole, you know, if you can't keep up, we're going to cut you out. Just generally, like, empathy and kindness. And on several shoots, I have been carried by my crew. Also, I started going to the gym because being on set is so tiring. It's exhausting. So, yes, taking care of your physical health is very important.
Yeah, I totally echo everything you're saying. And I think for me, you know, I waited between doing the play to doing the film, even though I had the idea for a little while I went to therapy for a while. And then when I was like, I'm never going to have it figured out. But when I was like, doing pretty good, then I was like, I think now it's time. And so then we went ahead and made it. And really, like, day one production meeting was, like, super important to be able to be like, hey, we all know we're telling a fictionalized version of what things that happened to me and that I did. That's probably going to be great sometimes. It's probably going to suck sometimes. And was just open with the casting crew and was like, like there might be moments that it's hard for you. Like, it's just hard for you because either I'm friends with you and we're working together and you're like, this happened maybe, and like that sucks. And so just leaving it so it could be really transparent, we could just talk about it. And I believe in the idea that like we can't actually create safe spaces, but we can create brave spaces. And in those spaces where we allow ourselves to be brave, because you can't keep everybody safe. Like, the thing that might keep you safe might hurt you. Like, that's the tricky thing about the work that we do. But if we can create a brave space where people can be open and feel like they can be honest and fail and be allowed to fail, then maybe we can take care of each other. And I like the idea that like you have to go slow to go fast. So if you have to stop for half an hour because someone is genuinely hurting, then you stop, and then when we're ready, we keep going, and the movie will be made at some point. And if a scene has to play out in a wide because you don't have time to get coverage, well, that person was taken care of.
Are you my therapist? Okay. Between conception and getting it on screen, what were the parts where like that were kind of just lost in the fray? And then in the cutting room floor, was there anything that was like, you were like, nah, I'd rather people don't know this about me?
This is a big question. 2 big questions. No, it's all good. So the first one is conception to ideation, what got left behind. I think that, I started writing several different drafts of this story, and I think what really changed is, the ending note, like how in the initial draft it was very like, I am gay and I'm sad. So, Patrick walks into the ocean. I kind of want to put that on a t-shirt. Yeah. Just because. Patrick walks in the ocean and he just like turns into a fish and is never sees his family again. And at the time it's like that's how it felt. Like I had to, interact with my family. That's how a lot of, queer folks feel like. But I think that over time and, finding support, finding community, after moving to Toronto, it was like, maybe it doesn't have to be that way. And then larger conversation with the broader Asian community and what it needed at the time during the pandemic, it was like, I think this feels more right. In terms of in post, I think, honestly, that because this is my baby in so many ways, I feel like I could have been more disciplined and I could have cut more. Oh. But all the, it was like, oh, but this shot is so good and this song is so good. And I look at it now and it's very syrupy sweet. And I think that there's a different cut of the film that exists that may be stronger, but it's so personal for me that it was hard to cut. I think, like I spoke about before, I think as I mature as a filmmaker, I'll be able to take a step back and see the story more objectively, or stories in general more objectively. But this one, it was kind of like, it's just, I had to do it. And it was a learning process, so. Yeah.
And Taylor?
So from concept to the page or screen, I lost quite a bit from the play, quite a bit. Like it was the play was more autobiographical and the movie was more fictionally autobiographical, meaning like my daughter was in the play. It's a solo show, but then when I went to do the film, I was like, no, I'm not including her. Like that was like, this is about me. I'll include myself. I'm not including my partner. I'm not including any real version of the people that I love in my life. I'll protect them. If I'm gonna like walk out in front of the arrows, I'm gonna do it by myself, sort of thing. And then also because the way that we shot it, we'd shoot like a weekend, and then I'd take 2 months off, and then would like write the next section, edit, look at it, go and then write and then cut. So it's just like evolved as it went. So in terms of like what the original was, I wouldn't even be able to tell you anymore because it just changed so much from beginning to end because I kind of had an idea where we're going, but it was like really vague. So it just kept evolving because we did 5 shooting sequences. Yeah. A year and a half.
Whoa.
So we did 17 days over a year and a half. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And before we wrap up, I guess, was there anything where you were like, to answer your second part, I'm like not in the mood to have the world think that about me. Like, it's a no for me.
You know what? I had to resist that so many times. So all of those moments are in the movie. Oh. But I had to look at it, and I'd sit, one of my editors, one of my best friends, and I would be like, should we cut that bit? And he was like, why do you want to cut it? And I'd be like, never mind. Like, he would just kind of hold me. But we did cut like 30 something minutes out of the movie in the end that just weren't helping it. Yeah. That were just muddying it more.
Well, it has been a pleasure to talk to you lovely filmmakers. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aisha, Taylor, and Christopher for sharing so authentically the way that you do. This chat was produced by Jen Pogue, Ashley Rains, and Bern Euler for the Canadian Film Fest. Music by Brett Higgins. The Cheers and Chats podcast is co-produced, edited, and sound mixed by Ryan Gordon. For more info on the fun happening now at CFF, find us at canadianfilmfest.ca.